This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Salesforce and Carahsoft. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, DoD's IT team applies its lever to the fulcrum, maximizing the potential of one of the hottest technologies ever, and the CIA's three-pronged approach to AI. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The Defense Department calls its new Fulcrum IT advancement strategy, quote, a user-centric, cross-cutting approach. It's built the strategy on 4 lines of effort. Leslie Beavers is the Acting Chief Information Officer at DoD. Leslie, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Before we get into the 4 lines of effort, how did you develop this strategy and who all was involved in developing it?
It was a team effort across the entire Department of Defense. I had representatives from the Guard Bureau, representatives from agencies, from all the services, and it was a team of about 40 folks that pulled together the strategic guidance that we'd been receiving and the efforts that we knew needed to be done into, this is what we need to do for the next 5 years in the modernization journey for the Department of Defense.
The 4 lines of effort are providing joint warfighting IT capabilities, modernizing information networks and compute, optimizing IT governance, and cultivating a premier digital workforce. Among all the possibilities, how did you settle on those 4 as the major areas that you wanted to then bring all the others underneath?
Right, so I gave the team some directions. I'm like, this is not, I don't want a cybersecurity line of effort. This is warfighter focused, this is customer focused. So what do we need to do to modernize and move the Defense Department in a way where we are coalescing all of our lines of effort together to actually deliver capabilities for the warfighter. So that's why you ended up with LOE1, which is our warfighting IT capability focus. You've got things like command and control in there, and position navigation and timing. And number 1, you've got customer experience or the user experience as our primary deliverable in that line of effort. Then you've got actually modernizing the network and making it coalesce into a single, like from the user's perspective, it should feel like the internet, not a bunch of different separate networks. So there's that. And then you've got the governance piece, which is not just the boards and the bureaus and how we keep track of what we spend on what, but it is also how do we decide what we turn on, what we modernize or mature, and what we turn off, which is really important because in the department we're good at turning things on and maybe not as efficient at turning things off. And then finally there's the actual warfighter, the cyber workforce, which was a bit of a contentious issue. Was it the cyber workforce or the digital workforce? And I was very happy that the team landed on digital workforce. So it includes not just our cyber colleagues, but also our software modernization, our data, and our AI, because we as a department need to grow that workforce in a deliberate manner.
When you talk about the fact that there's no cyber LOE, which I think makes sense for the reason I'll mention in a moment, and then what you just said about the digital workforce, what my takeaway was as I read through this is that cyber has gotten to a point, at least I think you probably hope, that it's integrated into everything the department does, and it's not taken for granted, but it should be thought of as something that is just the way we do things now. Is that a fair read on my part?
Yes, it is. It's the way we work. And so Zero Trust is part of getting the network right. And that is a child strategy to this strategy. So when we developed Fulcrum, we were trying to meet the objectives of the national security strategy and our guidance, and then provide tangible, outcome-based objectives for our child strategies. And so Fulcrum is a start. It's got these 4 lines of effort and 15 objectives within it. Under each objective, there are some important capabilities that we've identified. And with each important capability, we're in the process now of fleshing out the implementation plan, which will have objectives and key results under each one of those capabilities. So if you're a program manager and you're like, I want to improve my cybersecurity, there are now going to be objectives and specific metrics that you can go to and say, oh, this is how the department needs me to make decisions to get more secure and also be more interoperable with the rest of the department, which is, that's the role that I think the CIO, where we add value for the department, is to help do this synchronization.
You alluded to something that I wanted to go to next, and that is there's no shortage of strategies and doctrines across the department. Where does this fit into, and how did you make sure that it did sync with all of the other things? You mentioned national security strategy, the zero trust strategy, your colleague Randy Resnick. Right.
Workforce strategy,
yes.
Oh my goodness. And and the document is completely unclassified. You can go to the CIO webpage, download it. That was the other thing. It's also only 16 pages long. I tried to get it under 10. There are a lot of photos and tables, so it is an easy read, but it does have a really good graphic in there that shows you the parent strategies and the child strategies. That team of 40 folks put a lot of effort into making sure that they nested Fulcrum to where it added the clarity and it for the strategic strategies, and it gave enough objectives for the child strategies, which ideally would have been developed afterwards, but you know, it's the government. We don't get to do things ideally all the time, so we just have to make it work together. You
mentioned customer experience, and I talked to your colleague Savan Kong at TechNet Cyber, and that conversation is going to be on the FedGov Today podcast this coming week. It's available in the archives at fedgovtoday.com. How did you build customer experience into this, given the emphasis that now takes inside the department?
We started by, with that group of 40 folks, instead of focusing on the problem statement, which when you do gaps and needs analysis, that's kind of where we start. So we know what the problem statements are. Our unique twist here was we focused on a future. In 5 years, what does success look like? So by doing the future vision, and that means that you have mobile apps that seamlessly integrate with your international partners. And so there was a whole exercise that we went through to start with that future state and then work backwards from, okay, if that's the future vision, what do we need to have in place to make that work? And then, of course, standing up the customer experience office, which in recruiting the talent that had experience not only on the government side but also on the commercial side to deliver this kind of user experience to the warfighter. Because I'm here because I'm part of the Fix My Computer Brigade, but instead of just saying fix my computer, I decided to come to the DoD and try and help fix the computers. Yeah. So I'm very passionate about this.
And it strikes me too, normally at this point in the conversation, I would say, how will you measure success? But if you know what you want the future vision to look like in 5 years, and you know what the steps look like between now and then, you know whether you're on track or not.
Right, but in the department, the challenge that we have is our systems are very old and they're not instrumented. So you will see this year, I'm really trying to mobilize commitment around Fulcrum through 4 specific areas that I'm championing this year, one for each of the LOEs. And then we've got to start measuring our progress. So I'm putting in place the measurements so we can track it, so we can make this change last. Because I've got, about 6 months, I think, to be able to do that. So for example, for the warfighter, getting that customer experience office stood up and actually functioning and helping synchronize all the good customer experience work that's being done in the services. And then that bleeds over into the mission partner environment, which is the kind of the generic term for how do we communicate with our allies and partners. And even beyond communication, how do we share operational pictures and workflows? So that is the second one that I'm really driving. And then under the governance, it's turning things off. And then the warfighter, the cyber workforce, it's establishing our academic engagement office. And I think you talked to Mark about that a little while ago.
I did. He was on FedGov Today a couple of weeks ago, also from TechNet Cyber, talking about that. We have about 30 seconds left. Why are you so passionate about this in particular, personally, Leslie?
Because I have spent 20 years being the outsider. I was an Air Force person, and if you're on an Air Force network, it worked for you, but I was always the reservist or the joint person, somebody that was always on the outside, and it never worked. And for me, IT that doesn't work is fingernails on a chalkboard, so I'm like, okay. And I actually retired from the Air Force because I was frustrated with this, so.
It's wonderful to have you on the program. Thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you so much.
You can find a link to the Fulcrum strategy on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com, and you can learn more about the Fulcrum strategy's customer experience elements from Leslie's colleague, Sivan Kong, on the newest episode of the FedGov Today podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Up next, maximizing the potential of one of the hottest technologies ever. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. You'll take a deep dive into the cutting-edge world of cybersecurity on Innovation in Government from TechNet Cyber, available now on demand at innovationingov.com. You'll see exclusive conversations with top cyber leaders from DISA, the DoD Office of the Chief Information Officer, and industry experts, all sharing their insights from AFCEA's TechNet Cyber. Discover how these leaders are outpacing threats and securing the DoD's digital future. Don't miss this unique opportunity. Innovation in Government from TechNet Cyber, presented by Carahsoft. Available now on demand at innovationingov.com. Welcome back. 3 pilot programs will test large language models and generative artificial intelligence at the Department of Homeland Security. DHS says the pilots will, quote, enhance immigration officer training, help communities cut the burden for applying for disaster relief grants, and improve efficiency of law enforcement investigations. Casey Coleman is Senior Vice President for Global Government Solutions at Salesforce. She's former Chief Information Officer at the General Services Administration. Casey, welcome. Cloud was a big deal. Everybody's talking about AI now.
Right.
2 technologies that appear to be at least transformative.
Yes.
On the other hand, we have blockchain and some others that were a big deal for a while and have faded away. How does one examine, for example, generative AI and see whether it's something that is something that an agency should invest in for the long term or spend a lot of time on pilot programs and so on?
Thanks, Francis. Good to be here. And I love this topic because we've seen so many technologies come and go. In addition to blockchain, things like NFT, non-fungible tokens, Internet of Things. I think the difference between those and the technologies that stick, like cloud and mobile and social, first of all, these are things that make our work easier and that we use not only in our work lives but in our personal lives. So AI is already a huge consumer trend. You're probably using it, I'm using it to draft and think about things and as just kind of an aid in my personal life. And so the fact that it's a big consumer trend, that it makes our lives easier, and it's not just a technology that makes life better for someone else, but for the individual employee, and especially if it's integrated into their work, into the flow of work.
What are the keys to integrating AI into the flow of work, especially in an organization where maybe technology is not as modern as it could be in order to do that?
A couple of things. First, it has to be, you have to be able to get to the data. That is the foundational challenge for any government use case. And take, for example, a public defender's office. We work with some large public defender's office. They represent people who can't afford to hire their own attorneys. And oftentimes they'll get a case with no advance warning, and they need to show up in court and represent that person. And if AI can tackle their backlog of case data, they can understand at a moment's notice on their mobile device what the case is, what else is pending with that client, and they can show up and represent them well. And there's a ton of other use cases like that, where if you bring it into the day-to-day work, it's not just another system to go cut and paste, but it makes your life easier and takes friction out.
I think the encouraging thing, to the point that you made earlier about where does this fall as far as some of these other buzzword technologies, a lot of the work that I'm seeing agencies do, and I wonder if it's the same with your customers, is revolving around use cases instead of let's try AI and see what it does or something like that.
Absolutely.
I mentioned the cases at DHS, and that seems to be more common across government.
Yeah, I was struck by those. Those are all practical use cases, and I think the things that are going to surface first as real benefits are back office business cases, for example, procurement. It's a paperwork heavy process, it's highly regulated, it's largely the same across every agency, and there's really not been a good way to automate it and allow employees, contracting officers, to focus on the high value work that only they can do.
One of the things that you know very well is that agencies are focused on governance for all of these things. What's your sense of what a strong governance structure that still allows for flexibility of testing and pilots and so on looks like?
I think it has to start with values and ethics and be grounded in trust and transparency. People want to know how their information is being used, and then with that transparency, they are willing to participate. So I think the trust and transparency, working to use the data in a way that's ethical and grounded in compliance, and then putting the person at the center, whether it's the employee or the citizen, whoever it is you're serving, starting with them first.
A little bit less than a minute left. What does success look like for an agency long term, do you think, especially in the generative AI space, given how new the technology is, at least as far as the way people use it?
I think generative AI is really a game changer for us to get to some of the complex mission outcomes that we never could do before because the government world is so complex. Things like much faster time to drug trials, to be able to release new drugs faster to save lives. I think that's a huge thing that we'd all love to see generative AI support.
Casey Coleman, great to talk to you as always.
Thank you, Francis.
Very much. You can read more about generative AI in government on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the CIA's three-pronged approach to AI. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. You'll take a deep dive into the cutting-edge world of cybersecurity on Innovation in Government from TechNet Cyber, available now on demand at innovationingov.com. You'll see exclusive conversations with top cyber leaders from DISA, the DoD Office of the Chief Information Officer, and industry experts, all sharing their insights from AFCEA's TechNet Cyber. Discover how these leaders are outpacing threats and securing the DoD's digital future. Don't miss this unique opportunity. Innovation in Government from TechNet Cyber, presented by Carahsoft, available now on demand at innovationingov.com. Welcome back. The Central Intelligence Agency's new AI strategy features 3 pillars. One of the goals of the strategy is to help the agency stay ahead of adversaries who are using AI tools too. Lakshmi Rahman is Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer at the CIA. Welcome. It's great to have you on the program. Before we go through the strategy, I'll ask you the same question I asked Leslie about Fulcrum. How did you put this together, and who all was involved in putting your strategy together?
Sure. So thank you for having me. When we put together the AI strategy, it's with the understanding that we had been doing data science and AI at the CIA for a very, very long time. So it was incredibly important that we took a whole of agency approach with respect to pulling together the strategy. So we really coalesced with all of the mission centers and all of the directorates in order to coordinate, develop, and advance the CIA's AI strategy.
All right, pillar 1 is AI as an intelligence topic. I like the phrasing there. What is behind that phrasing?
So our job is really to inform the policymakers all about everything that has global impact. So AI, with, as you can imagine, all of the global impact that's ongoing, is something that we felt needed to be tracked and collected on and analyzed in and of itself. It's incredibly important that we were thinking about our adversaries' plans, use, and intentions with respect to this, so we can really help understand how it's going to address our national security mission.
And so you're thinking about it from not just a position of what you're doing, but what everybody else might be doing, both, I imagine, allies and adversaries. Is that a fair read on my part?
Absolutely. In addition to that, we're also incredibly interested in how we are going to utilize it ourselves, right? So that takes us into our second pillar of the AI strategy, right? How are we leveraging AI to be able to augment our own human judgment, to be able to automate our own workflows and move a little bit faster, our low-level cognitive tasks. And really, when we think of that, we're thinking about how do we democratize access to the models for our data scientists and our developers, and how do we incorporate these technologies into the workflows of our officers. So we really want it to where it's really making a day in the life for them much easier. In addition to those kind of pointy edge of the spear capabilities, we're also thinking about those AI adjacent activities that need to come along when we are trying to augment AI as a mission enabler. How are we upskilling, recruiting, retaining our workforce? How are we ensuring we have the right technological foundations in place to enable AI at scale? How are we making sure we do everything in a responsible and ethical manner? And then finally, how are we working with our partners across the IC, across the USG, as well as our academic and industry partners? So all of that really falls under our second pillar of the AI strategy.
You mentioned integrating this into the workflows of your personnel. What did you learn from that process as you started to implement this strategy, and what do you expect, what are you going to track at least as far as integrating it into their workflows moving forward?
So the one thing that is incredibly important is collaboration. The collaboration between our subject matter experts, which is in this case our AI practitioners, our data scientists, as well as our mission and business partners, because really when we're talking about augmenting human judgment and automating low-level cognitive tasks, it's our business that's going to help us understand what those are. And then our practitioners and our data scientists are the ones who are actually going to be able to implement those solutions. So that collaboration is incredibly important. I think when we start talking about tracking, we're really talking about governance, right? We're starting to talk about our third pillar of this strategy. And when we're talking about governance, we're really talking about a whole of agency approach to thinking about what are the most important things we're going to be doing, what are the gaps and duplications we need to be thinking about so that we can fill in those or deduplicate efforts. What are we tracking and progressing on and monitoring so that we can inform our senior leadership as well as our oversight mechanisms. Our governance pillar also includes the work we do on risk, right? Because obviously we need to do our best to mitigate risk with respect to AI. And it also includes all of the recent work that's happened with respect to the President's executive order. And luckily, we have an IC ethics framework that we've been able to draw upon within the intelligence community that we can then help to drive these activities within the agency.
It strikes me that data underpins in some way or another each one of these three pillars. What did you learn about your data as far as you started to work on implementing this plan, about its condition or its curation or the way you're storing it, any of that?
Right, so I have a very close partnership with our Chief Data Officer at the CIA. We probably talk every day. Yeah. And it's really about working with them to ensure, as you said, the data is conditioned and curated and made available in bulk so that we can leverage it to drive our AI solutions.
What is I've seen you speak a number of times, talk about public-private partnerships. What's the context for that in an artificial intelligence environment in an organization like CIA?
Oh my goodness, like public-private partnership is essential to the work we do at the CIA. Number one is, we have a very, very talented workforce at the CIA, and especially our data scientists are so heavily in demand. And we are in a space where the demand far exceeds the supply. So we are working very heavily, and they're very gainfully employed where we work, but we need to lean on our private industry to bring us solutions and capabilities that can help us also meet our national security mission. With respect to AI, particularly generative AI, private industry is also leading the way. They're leading and innovating in that space. So working with them on generative AI services and solutions, as well as with non-traditional partners who can provide us those more niche solutions to drive our national security mission, is incredibly important.
How do you go about finding those niche technologies that will help you get the edge that you've talked about seeking?
We've done a number of things. Number one, we leverage the common kind of FAR mechanisms you might imagine, right? Competitive competitions, sole source competitions, sole source mechanisms, but also we're looking at non-traditional approaches as well to help us explore.
As you explore those, What are the things that make a technology potentially appealing to you? Is it just it does something that we don't have access to now, or is it more complicated, more complex than that?
I think I think that's one aspect, right? Are there things that that industry is leading on that we don't have the ability to do? Sometimes it's the opposite, right? Sometimes it's what are they doing that they can do on behalf of everybody that we can then leverage, and we can use our in-house CIA data scientists to be able to develop the exquisite classified solutions that we need them to.
We talked at the beginning of the conversation about the need to stay ahead of adversaries. How does one gauge how one is doing, or how does an organization gauge how you're doing at doing that in an area like this?
So, that's a lot of our bread and butter, right, within the Directorate of Analysis, is they're really doing a lot of work to analyze, understand what the threat looks like with respect to our adversaries' plans, use, and intentions with AI. And we're seeing, a lot of progress in that space since we've made that a strategic pillar.
A little bit less than a minute left. How do you judge success of the deployment execution of this strategy?
So we are collecting a number of metrics, both quantitative and qualitative vignettes, to help us address how mature we are as an agency against our 3 strategic pillars, not in a relative way, but in an absolute way, to understand, how our maturity looks. We are also thinking about what return on investment looks like for our investments. So we are doing a number of data-driven. We're doing a bit of data-driven work to do that, but also collecting vignettes where we can really understand where the mission impact has been.
Do you have a time frame that you think will be a reasonable amount of time to be able to look at those metrics and say, okay, we've come this far? If so, what does that look like?
We're doing that currently. We're doing that on an ongoing basis.
Thank you very much for joining me. It's great to have you on the program today.
Thank you very much.
You can read more about AI at CIA on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in a moment. You'll take a deep dive into the cutting-edge world of cybersecurity on Innovation in Government from TechNet Cyber, available now on demand at innovationingov.com. You'll see exclusive conversations with top cyber leaders from DISA, the DoD Office of the Chief Information Officer, and industry experts, all sharing their insights from AFCEA's TechNet Cyber. Discover how these leaders are outpacing threats and securing the DoD's digital future. Don't miss this unique opportunity. Innovation in Government from TechNet Cyber, presented by Carahsoft, available now on demand at innovationingov.com. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30 with the Deputy CIO of the United States, Drew Mickelgard, and Eric Mill of GSA on the new way forward for FedRAMP. Don't forget, you'll learn more about DoD's Fulcrum strategy on the new FedGov Today podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you next Sunday. Thanks very much for watching. Have a great week.